Hello, this is America, where President Trump is warning that an entire civilization will die in Iran. What do the American people make of that? This war has divided this country, not just along party lines, but within the Republican Party itself. The polls are there, the numbers are there. Question is, will that make any difference to President Trump's rationale? We're going to start digging into that right now with me, Phil Lavelle, and in the studio, my colleague, Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Phil. As the world waits to see what happens next in Iran, Americans fall firmly divided over the state of their republic. Kimberly Halkett will be joining us from the White House in just a moment, and Richard Gaisford is live for us in Washington, D.C. It's not just concerns about being stuck in a foreign war. Fuel prices are at a 4-year high, and looming fertiliser shortages will impact food security. The economic fallout is threatening to cast a shadow over November's midterm elections. And while a good result for Republicans would be a good result for the president, a bad one could lead to catastrophic outcomes, both personal and political.
Seems ill-advised, ill-organized, and I don't even know what the word is.
Very dismayed, very concerned.
We don't want a war, we want a peace. Integrity for all of the peoples around the globe, right?
I don't think it's the right decision to go to war, but I realize that that country and that regime had its problems, and we need to maybe not rush to action, but action needed to be taken at some point.
While there are a lot of people that are happy about the idea of that regime being wiped out, the way it's being done, I don't think that was the intention.
At this point, the majority of Americans don't even think the US should keep going in the war, despite it so far failing to achieve its stated outcomes. 66% say they want out now, even if it means the US does not achieve all its goals in Iran. But despite the majority of the public calling for an end to the war, time and time again, Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened escalation.
They're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants. Stone Ages, yeah. The entire country could be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
That same Ipsos poll we just showed you found 60% disapprove of US military strikes against Iran. While Republican support stays strong, the number of Democrats in favour is in the single digits. So how does this all play out, where politics and public opinion coincide? In a moment, we'll go to Richard Gaisford, who's at Eastern Market in Washington, D.C. But first, let's go to Kimberly Halkett, who joins us from the White House. Kimberly, President Trump's public messaging on Iran, is that rhetoric ramping up?
There's no question that that is what is the view of some top Democrats in the U.S. Senate. In fact, so much so, given the incendiary language of the president, that it's prompted Senate Democrats to issue a joint statement condemning Donald Trump's threat to extinguish the Iranian people. Top Democrat Chuck Schumer saying that it is sick, and every Republican in the U.S. Senate who fails to help vote to stop the war owns every consequence of it. Another Democrat, Chris Murphy, calling this morally wrong, and Democrats should say this loudly. But I should point out that Republicans in the U.S. Senate feel very differently. In fact, in a statement, they said that they believe that Iran has harmed Americans, and they are grateful for a president that will defend Americans. But this has led to a breakdown in diplomacy between the United States and Iran, direct communications and indirect communications. And so we reached out to the White House press secretary for her reaction. She said that the Iranian regime has until 8 p.m. Washington, D.C. time to come up and meet the moment of the United States. But only the president of the United States knows where things stand and what he will do.
Quite a lot of division at the top then. Richard, I'll bring you in here because we know what the polls say. What are people then telling you about how they feel about the war in Iran?
Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating these last few weeks being here in Washington, travelling outside of the Capitol, talking to people about their feelings around this war. For so many of them, and I would say that it is based on party lines, who they voted for as president the last election. There are those who are deeply concerned about the human rights issues that this war brings up, the large numbers of civilian deaths. That's just one of the nuances on those who are against the war. The others really telling me a lot of times about the huge amounts of money they think that is being wasted on the war. And I heard that myself from Zohran Mamdani, the New York mayor, when I sat down to interview him later yesterday for an interview that airs later this week. He's saying there's billions of dollars that could be put to much better use. But for those who are in favor of this war, there are so many of them who truly believe that the Iranian regime posed a great threat, not only to the United States, but also to the Western world. And amongst that group, people who genuinely believe that a nuclear weapon was about to be developed. You'll hear all of these voices in material we've gathered over the last few days.
For students marching around George Washington University, the war's given them another reason to disapprove of President Trump.
It's obvious their narrative changes every single day. So there's no plan, there's no exit strategy. Nobody knows what's going on, including his own cabinet.
So I think it's quite frankly stupid, because I don't think that we should be interfering with other countries, especially if we can't already handle ourselves. We have so many people in need and we're not helping them.
But we find a different point of view by the Capitol's reflecting pool.
They had to be stopped. It's a regime that is nuts.
And the cost and the sacrifice, will it be worth it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we're on board.
And if it means high costs and high loss of life, would you still be on board?
Such is the nature of war.
I would say it's worth the cost. It's an investment in the future.
The cherry blossom in the nation's capital is a sign of renewed growth.
Worth it.
But at the annual Kite Festival, it's clear how tangled public opinion in the country has become.
What message are you getting that makes you think that the war is the right thing?
It's going to end up being a safer world after it's all said and done. I feel that, I believe that.
What do you think about the war in particular? Do you think this country should be in it?
No. No, I mean, we keep going back to the Middle East for some reason. We seem to really like it, but I don't think anybody here likes it.
Youth competition is just getting ready to start.
So what set out as a supposedly simple task in Iran has certainly proved to be anything but child's play.
Well, there's a real warmth of spirit here in Washington, but also a chill wind blowing through the city. People are really concerned about the direction this war is taking and who really is in control of it.
There's concern about the cost of living shooting up, with dramatic rises in the price of fuel, a metric that's known to affect people's decision at the ballot box. A prolonged war, with associated costs, likely to affect Republican prospects in the midterm elections this November.
I think there is a big divergence in opinions on where this country is going right now. But I think that one of the cornerstones of our country is that we will work it out.
It's a really hard time to be in this world, which is why we could all use a little bit more of love and kindness.
I am not a fan of the war. I'm not a fan of anything that's going on in the United States today. Very dismayed, very concerned.
The war means change is in the air, forcing people to focus on their worldviews. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Right, let's take a closer look at those deeper divisions over the war in Iran. Back to Phil in the newsroom.
Yeah, polls and polarization, two words that are at the heart of how the American media is covering this. Remember, the American public largely against Iran's nuclear ambitions, but ending those, what that looks like, that is what is splitting people. So let's start with CBS News, because CBS has really been looking at those numbers that we've just been talking about. And their analyst here was talking about the MAGA side, the Make America Great Again side of the Republican Party. It is typically against any foreign involvement or involvement in foreign wars. That is a key election promise that Donald Trump fought on, but it's also very defensive of President Trump. And here's what this analyst had to say about how MAGA feels.
This is something that wasn't necessarily what they expected during the 24 campaign, but how are they receiving it now? That positive rating is in part due, and maybe this isn't a surprise for that MAGA base, to their strong support and confidence in the president.
Up next, it is the Washington Times. Now, if you don't know the Washington Times, this is a right-leaning publication, and this is from the opinion section from one of their columnists, Clifford D. May. He says, on the illiberal left and the defeatist right, America's military campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran is being condemned as a war of choice, not a war of necessity. And he goes on to add this: American troops should never be in a fair fight. If our enemies see that we have the means and the will to defeat them, then that may deter them. Nothing else will. Certainly not endless negotiations and attempts to appease them. And those words we just heard, war of choice, that takes us to Democracy Now!, because Democracy Now! Was talking about this on its daily news show. And this analyst was saying that President Trump chose to launch this war effectively without thinking it through. Take a listen.
Well, of course, this war started as a war of choice. The president went into this conflict with a high degree of wishful thinking that it would be a quick win. We know that CENTCOM had warned him against Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, and he had dismissed those warnings.
All right, how about NBC News? The headline here: polls show consistent majorities opposing military action in Iran after a month of war. Question is, why? And here's your answer. Sizable shares of Americans have also raised concerns about the war's impact on gas prices, saying they believe gas prices will go up because of the conflict. Remember, this is America. This is a country of car lovers. So people are feeling this at the pumps on a daily basis. And that is where SNL jumps in. Now, if you don't know SNL, Saturday Night Live, this is a big deal in the United States. It is a comedy news satire show. It's on every week. It's been going for about 50 years. In fact, more than 50 years. Side note, President Trump really dislikes SNL. He's often talked about how he thinks it's not fit for purpose. It should be axed. And that is because SNL parodies him on a weekly basis. And you might get a sense of why he doesn't like this show when you watch this sketch about this family who are feeling the pain at the pump.
Dad, why does gas cost so much?
The Epstein file! Kidding. But possibly not. It's called butterfly effect, right? Epstein was first domino. Epstein, bing, bing, bang, bang, bing, bing, bang, bang, bang. War.
Of course, that is emphasizing the issue for comedy purposes, but 2/3 of Americans do believe this is a war of choice. Whether the president's choices will be impacted by those polls, by those numbers, well, that is another matter.
All right, joining us to discuss that and more, two experts in their field today, Democratic strategist James Butler and Republican pollster Whit Ayres. Thank you both for coming in. James, I'll start with you. Are you surprised at the level of support for the war in Iran?
I am a bit surprised, and I'll tell you why. You know, we have a president that campaigned in 2024 on the American First agenda. And as a basic tenet of that American First agenda was no new wars. And that almost parrots what the president himself said. But now we're in a war. One of the first things he's done, major things, in his second term is started a war. And there's no clear mission. No clear end goal, so I am a bit surprised.
Yeah. Whit, I do need to touch on the point of the moment, which is Donald Trump's most recent comments that he's threatened now that a whole civilization will die. For a man who was saying no new wars, that is a remarkable shift in public opinion, or rather in statements or position. How does that impact public opinion?
The beginning of wisdom about public opinion on the war in Iran in America is to appreciate the total dominance of Donald Trump in our political life and how polarizing he is. If you look at his job approval overall, it's about 39%. The job approval or the approval of the war in Iran is, guess what, 39%. So the people who like Donald Trump, trust his judgment, think he has America's best interest at heart, are for the war. The people who don't like Donald Trump, don't trust his judgment, and think he has only his personal interests at heart, are against the war. It's almost a one-for-one relationship.
Yeah. Is there any way that that momentum or that swing can shift or change over time, especially when we see the president himself shifting his opinion, the seesawing over whether it's a negotiation or it's moving to an escalation?
And it will. What I think you're going to see, and most Americans are probably already seeing, if you drive a typical combustion automobile, you're seeing the pain points at the gas pump. And I don't think this can be ignored. I think if the war literally was to stop today, those economic impacts would reverberate to Americans up until November. I think it's political suicide to have started a war during an election year, midterms, and I think it will come at a great cost to the president. What I also will think you will see is not only Americans feeling that pain point at the gas pump, they're seeing heating their homes is costing more, food is costing more. They're seeing that the president really didn't keep his promises. So now on top of that, you have a war, and that I believe will run until November. And I think if he tries to end it earlier, I think the Iranians, being very, very understanding of U.S. Politics, they're going to try to drag it out to ensure that they get to at least poke Donald Trump in the eye one last time.
James has used the phrase political suicide. Is it political suicide to have begun this war?
Anna, Republicans are going to stick with Trump for the most part on the war because they're for him, they voted for him, and they continue to support him. Democrats have never been for him at all. Where the gas prices hurt most is the independents who used to vote Democrat, but who voted for Donald Trump in 2024, in part to bring down the inflation that plagued us during the Biden years. So it's the independents who have gone south on him and gone south on the war, primarily, I think, because of the inflationary effects on gas prices and other things.
I want to pick up on that point there, because when we look at the Republican movement, there are so many different layers to it. And if I can pick up on this, Donald Trump has used a confusing and conflicting range of descriptions for the Iranian people in this conflict and its leadership.
Mr. President, how would it not be a war crime to strike Iran's radiation power? Because they killed 45,000 people in the last month. More than that. It could be as much as 60. They killed protesters. They're animals.
They are animals. When we hear phrasing like that from the President, Whit, does that do anything to shift the movement or the feeling amongst just one group of people, just Republicans or just independents?
It doesn't really do a lot among Republicans because they've come to dismiss the president's phrasing and exaggerations over many years. Where it does hurt is the same place where inflation hurts, and that's among the independents. He's lost about half of the support among independents that he had in the 2024 election. And that's a problem for the midterms.
Yeah. You're both thinking that midterms actually are a much bigger problem. We've had previous guests on who've said they're so far away. But, James, you seem to think that what is months away is actually an immediate problem.
I do. Americans typically have very short-term memories, as you know, Anna. But I definitely think the impact will be so lasting that it will take us to November. Like I said, if you literally ended the war today, still, gas isn't going to automatically go down. Those economic impacts are going to reverberate. Also, too, I think we've got to keep this in mind. It's maybe a bit safer now, but if we go in and we do some things that are, constitute war crimes or whatever, that looks bad. And you're going to have, by and large, you've got support from, Republican candidates on the ballot this coming November for Donald Trump. But what I do believe you will see, they will distance themselves if he goes in there and does something silly like commits a war crime. And he's talking about that.
We are actually already seeing that, right? Because we have seen today Republican lawmaker currently sitting, Marjorie Taylor Greene, coming out and calling for the 25th Amendment to be invoked. Americans, of course, do get a lot of their public discourse from the likes of not just their lawmakers, but, of course, social media influencers. That I'm thinking of the likes of Alex Jones, perhaps, and we have seen him make some comments around that today. Whit, how much do those sorts of comments from the likes of big social influencer accounts, from the likes of very popular lawmakers, play into that public discourse and opinion?
They've had almost no effect on MAGA voters. In fact, if you separate the MAGA Republicans from the traditional Republicans, MAGA Republicans are even more supportive of the war in Iran than traditional Republicans because they are going to support whatever Donald Trump believes and wants to do.
Can I say, Democrats are also, though, echoing some of this public opinion. I think we have a clip here of Chuck Schumer because he's saying the escalation is not what the public wants.
Enough is enough. The American people do not want a war with Iran that has no end. They do not want to see our troops deployed again and again to the Middle East, and they don't want to just have a knot in their stomach every time they pull up to the gas pump, and soon enough the grocery store as well, because of the higher prices caused by this war. It must come to an end.
Now, I want to get sort of into the nuance, a little into the weeds here, James, because polling shows both sides, majority oppose boots on the ground in Iran. So they sort of appear to sit on the same sideline here, but perhaps for different reasons as to why they don't want boots on the ground.
Yeah, I think you're right, Anna. One thing that I think we can all agree with, that everyone knew and knows that Iran is a threat. But now what we had Operation Sledgehammer that took place of June of 2025. We were assured by this administration that Iran was crippled, that its nuclear ambitions were crippled. And some experts actually would have opined that, in fact, Iran's nuclear capabilities at that time, post-Operation Sledgehammer, were probably 7 to 10 years behind their capabilities of forming a nuclear weapon, and certainly, an intercontinental ballistics nuclear weapon. And so we know that Iran was a threat, but I also think that most Americans oppose boots on the ground and oppose, things like Donald Trump is saying, that we're going to take out the vital infrastructures, civilian infrastructure. So I do think they're for different reasons. And I hope I'm getting to the heart of your question, because it seemed a bit nuanced in like I'm describing it. So let me know if I am.
No, I think you have answered it. And I will give you a right of reply just quickly if you would like to touch on that, because it is tricky, right? That you can both sides, Republicans and Democrats, say they don't want to see this escalate, but perhaps because they have different feelings about why in the first place.
Americans are still scarred by the wars in Iran and Iraq. And a lot of Americans who would otherwise believe in American force abroad do not want to see American men and women in combat.
No matter which side of the war you're on, social media debate has fired up over the president and his choice of actions. Here's Alex Baird.
The cause of public opinion. Social media sharing poll after poll, plummeting support for the Iran war, slumping approval for the president, more slumping approval, and a growing split across a very polarized American society. A society increasingly facing the reality of this. Social media feeds filled with the violent reality of war. And it's starting to wear. When you scroll through the voices, increasingly they are souring towards this operation. Despite that, the rhetoric from the American president increasingly violent. This early on Tuesday, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. And Iran's saying it's ready to fight back. The very opposite of what most polling here says Americans actually want. Radio host Brian Shapiro and Charlie Kirk show boss Andrew Colvert airing that split very publicly. Some still rallying behind Trump despite that polling being laid bare. The president being clear, he's a businessman, and if he had the choice, he'd go in and take Iran's oil.
To the winner belong the spoils, go the spoils. And I've said, why don't we use it? To the victor, go the spoils.
As the public anger rises, according to some, with anemic approval ratings for Trump and no rally behind the flag for the president and the Iran war, the tension in this country is now around what the president will do regardless of public opinion, and now many are wondering if anyone, including Congress, can stand in the president's way.
James, you've said previously this polling shows Americans view this as a war of choice.
It is a war of choice. It absolutely is a war of choice. There were no imminent threats. There were no articulated and imminent threats by this administration. It is not only a war of choice, but it has turned into a war of attrition that will have no end in sight. It's not over, unfortunately, when the U.S. says it's over with. Iran can run this thing as long as they want to now. Sure, with military power and might, the U.S. is winning. It might win the battle and lose the war.
Is the war midterms?
The war is certainly midterms, and then the war could go on beyond that.
Yeah. When we look at an escalation in conflict or an extension of conflict, I may sound a little conspiracy theorist here, so hear me out. Is there a concept or an idea that as time goes on and apathy builds and it meets the headlines less and less, that those approval and disapproval ratings tend to flatten out, and that is ultimately to the benefit of a president, or does it just not work like that?
It generally does not work like that.
Yeah.
People react to events, people react to the price of gas, people react to what's going on in the world. And it is important for the midterms because the most important factor in the midterms is the president's job approval. When it's above 50%, the average loss of House seats for the president's party is 14. But when it's below 50%, the average loss of House seats for the president's party is 32. So the president's job approval is critical for the outcome of the midterm elections.
You talked a bit about people remembering these conflicts. How much does generational difference come into how people feel about this conflict or about war in general?
It's very important in this conflict because of the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. That was 47 years ago. The people who remember the Iranian hostage crisis, the Americans who do, are more supportive of this war than those for whom the Iranian hostage crisis was just something they read about in a textbook. So that is a critical demographic change or difference in America because of the memory of the hostage crisis.
James, when we look at how things change over time, then how do you see public opinion, or support rather, shifting for this war as it goes on?
It will go against, I think opposition will be opposed to the war. There will be opposition to the war, and it will increase over time. We've seen it with the Vietnam War. Initially, Americans find these things palatable and say, yeah, we got to go in, we'll get it. But when they see that it becomes a war of attrition, there is no end in sight, I think you will see a less and less of an appetite as time goes on, and it will cost this administration at the midterms, and who knows, it may cost the president his job. I mean, they may move, if he commits these war crimes, they may move for his removal. And I suggest that every world leader should be speaking out against the president of the United States of America planning to commit war crimes.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, James Butler, Democratic strategist, and Whit Ayres, Republican pollster. Thank you both for your time and your insight. All right, that's all for This Is America from the team here in Washington, D.C., looking at how the war with Iran has been playing out in the court of public opinion. We'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. For now, we'll hand back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.